Okay, BIP of Bizarre Interest Productions, and it's time to talk about Beyblade again. Unexpectedly. Yeah, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes drama going on, but after I talked about the problems with the Metal Saga versus Beyblade Saga debates, I talked about how essentially Metal's goal was to create a future where Beyblade could be fun again without the worries about the sinister forces involved to force Bladers into becoming tools and soldiers for evil's purposes. Then I got a comment from Not Walter that said, I think that part at the end about Burst being the end goal of Metal is very interesting, considering by that logic, X is basically the dystopian hellscape Bakuten was trying to avoid. And I thought that was genius. But doing these videos these past couple of days has been super stressful, so I didn't get to respond that early. But student Zenets4738, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, responded, so I'm not the only one who thinks that Beyblade X's Pro League is basically BEGA. And the gears started turning in my head. Yeah, we have to talk about this. That's such a nuanced point I never even considered. So, for those of you new and unfamiliar to the world of Beyblade, in the original series, the BEGA League were the final antagonists of the original trilogy and the overarching opposing force in G-Revolution's final arc. Standing for Beyblade Entertainment Global Association, BEGA wanted to create a professional league level exclusively for high-skilled professional bladers. The founder, Boris Volkov, also known as Vladimir Volkov in the original, was the manager of BioVolt and the coach of the Demolition Boys, or Borg, back in Season 1, while under orders for Kai's grandfather, Voltaire. Basically an abuser to have the boys trained to win the world championships while stealing all the remaining bit beasts from every blader in the world. However, Tyson was able to defeat Tala in the final round. During the first half of Season 1, Boris stayed in the shadows while using the new company he founded in BEGA to take over the BBA's assets, hiring Jean-Paul Barthez as his agent, using the Barthez Battalion team as a way to recruit new young bladers, but forcing them to get through the tournament through underhanded and illegal tactics in order to promote bladers to dominate the competition and the World Championships as a trial run, cheating and resulting in the Majestics unable to enter the tournaments. Despite the fact fans blamed the teenagers manipulated into this grift who faced physical and verbal abuse by their coach, eventually they refused John's leadership and forced Barthez out of the team. However, when the second half of the season hit, Boris revealed himself, claiming he wanted to transform Beyblade into a professional sport because he was a changed man after watching kids play Beyblade in the street and entering a new leaf. But he truly showed his true colors by having Garland completely decimate the Blitzkrieg boys, and even though Tyler managed to tie with him, the latter ended up hospitalized from the damages. Thanks to encounters with other bladers recruited from the organization, we see that while BEGA has recruited bladers with either talent, skill, potential, or a combination of all three, they're ultimately being used as branding and icons that could be berated or abused behind the scenes like Barthez was. For example, Ming Ming was threatened with expulsions and being sent back to the burger joint she was found in, and thanks to her being seen as an idol first and Blader second, which was how she was advertised, she was mocked by people who only saw her actions as a publicity stunt and not a real blader, which is actually how some fans think about Ming Ming even to this day. Then you have Crusher, aka Moses in the original, who was blackmailed to have his sponsorship revoked when he needed the money to save his sister, and even after he won, him and Ming Ming were ordered to sabotage Tyson.
No matter what!
While Hero ultimately used BEGA as a means to test the Blade Breaker's strength, Boris had no care for Brooklyn's well-being and mental state from losing to Kai. Garland initially had no reservations about using brute force and crushing his opposition physically or mentally, before having to become the team's dad once he realized everyone's mental state was almost messed up in some degree. Kai was brutally beaten by Brooklyn during the training rounds to see who would make it into the Justice 5 team for the tournament, and Boris didn't have Brooklyn stop, given the special move completely destroyed John's RTT. And Misto, he was just vibing. The worst part about this is that BEGA was able to get a monopoly towards all the hobby shops and anyone that had access, because those who were out of a membership or didn't have one are not able to buy or use parts if they didn't sign up, which put the G-Revolutions at a massive disadvantage until Emily, Miguel after his heel-face turn, and Kenny worked together to create the heavy metal system Beyblades, since BEGA's Beyblades were essentially the most mastered versions of the engine gear system, and yet they were still able to go toe-to-toe with the stronger system. So here's the question. Is Beyblade X reflective of BEGA's ideal world if they won the tournaments? Well, let's talk about it. So, B4 is the organization in charge of the X, and choosing the bladers that can enter the higher floors, their selection tournaments to get chosen, and then they can enter the X. But to get higher, they have to challenge Cutover to do so, and once they do, it's up to their skill, promotional material, and matchmaking to challenge anyone they deem fit as long as their opponent agrees. Well, compared to BEGA, it doesn't seem as bad. Bird was an amateur in district level tournaments, and we see people playing for fun around the city, so there's probably no regulations or requirements to sign up just for regular Beyblading, so there's an advantage X over has compared to what BEGA would have wanted. What's familiar but also unique is how sponsorships work. Basically with BEGA, you had to be all in with BEGA or you weren't even going to get a chance to compete. With X, while you don't need to force a sponsorship with B4, you need a sponsor to officially obtain the right to be a pro team. And the show presents this as morally gray, which isn't actually a bad thing since we do see the good and bad sides of it. Persona has Komba Sushi, who care about Beyblade a lot. Zuganic technically doesn't have a sponsor, especially since King has his family, but they work at the X's indoor zoo, aka the Lion's Jungle. Pendragon works with a souvenir keychain company, which I'm still surprised makes a lot of money, but revenue. But we get to see the downsides of that, given that in that team, and I'll talk about it later, no one gets any help for their sanity, while Chrome is lauded as an unstoppable icon for the branding expertise. And we see the downsides with Team Phalanx getting betrayed by Mountain Ramen, though Yggdrasil is actually a pretty solid company. So what's the problem in comparisons to BEGA? Well, the thing is, you aren't restricted on who you can go to get an order to get sponsored compared to BEGA. It really ultimately depends on your connections. And well, I never thought I'd be exploring class divisions within Beyblade, but a lot of the pros, as we have seen, are at the very least leaders of their team, all either come from an established background or for some, including the sponsors. King and Queen need no explanation given that their family is either really talented or really smart or both. Pendragon's tied to a corporation. Yggdrasil speaks for itself. And in Season 2, we've got Zodiac having ties and the research for their Beyblades related to a space administration, and Goldia's name coming from the mega corporation Karuda's family owns. And to make matters worse, we've seen these teams be in abusive situations that are on par with the emotional abuse that BEGA gave to their bladers. I mean, Mountain Ramen CEO forced Takumi and his crew to switch up their battling style in Beyblades, or else he was going to drop them, and Pendragon is socially dysfunctional. Shigeru is stoic, blunt, and honest, but she lacks social skills. Shieru's mental health and sanity has taken a massive hit because of his obsession with Chrome, leading him to jealousy against Exu that was completely undeserved, as well as being completely rude to Bird for no valid reason. And Chrome developed a sanity slippage from losing Exu, and it's partially because his sponsors put him at the front of everything and position him as the strongest blader when he knows that Exu surpasses him in both skill, strength, and in terms of being able to connect with people. Even with Persona, we have no idea how Exu knew about Komaba Sushi in the first place as the go-to for a sponsor. Multi has ties to Shigeru, and Bird's an amateur, and no, I don't think Bird is carried by his teammates, but for a newbie blader team to get connections and becoming a pro blader, it might not be easy for anyone else in that circumstance unless they were Bird. That being said, we need to look at it from a case-by-case basis, and when you judge it from that lens, I think there's enough mental health and support between the other teams, between their teamwork, friendship, and mental health support, where they're avoiding a lot of the issues that affected BEGA. Major point in this argument I can concede on as well, the corruption. I think BEGA could work if it wasn't a mega corporation or the only one, but the problem with any corrupt organization is the leaders and people behind it that make it corrupt. The question is whether or not B4 is corrupt as BEGA, but the real problem is that while B4 has people that could be corrupt or those with ties to B4, some of them are immoral like Megaoka, who's doing all of this science and intrigue, while we know Kadaver is practically a saint. The real problem is that B4 gets exploited a fair number of times, usually for harmless reasons like Zonamos doing the riddle battle against Bird, or plays for the crowd like Tenka setting up the triple battle event. But even in cases like Pakun lying about Multi using AI and Dran Brave getting banned, clearly someone is in the antagonist's pocket, which is why even Shigeru tells Shieru that they can't trust B4 or their sponsors. But do I think B4 and the Society of X is the corrupt society of Beyblade that would have befell with BEGA's victory? Probably not. X's world is filled with a lot of holes and issues, but there's enough patch spots where it's definitely less toxic than the worst case scenario that BEGA's reign would have provided. Even though I can definitely hear arguments as to why. And heck, depending on your team and sponsor, you can be responsible for your own promotion at least. So compared to BEGA, at least these bladers and X have their own flexibility and autonomy, but like any community or organization, it all depends on how ethically all parties are. But that's about it for this video. I've said all I can say, but I want to leave the discussion to you guys. Let me know all your thoughts and comments below. I really should be telling you guys to like, comment, and subscribe because I actually do like engaging with you guys. So comment, please. But thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and BIP of Bizarre Interest Productions. Check out another video, and signing off.